Muchísimas gracias por su presencia en general. El día de hoy tengo el agrado de presentarles a una persona que ha tomado un largo vuelo para compartirnos su experiencia. Tengo el placer de llamarle una compañera de trabajo y a la vez una mentora. Anneleen Straetemans estudió Derecho en la Universidad de Lovaina, en Bélgica. Adicionalmente tiene su LLM por la Universidad de Berkeley. Fue asociada principal en Freshfields para las oficinas de Londres y de Bruselas. Y hoy en día nos acompaña como la directora global de competencia de Anheuser-Busch InBev. Un aplauso, por favor. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. First, please forgive me for addressing you in English, but because of the topic of my theme requires a bit of nuance, I was afraid that if I would do it in my gringo Spanish, a lot of that nuance would get lost. So I'll try to speak slowly, but if you don't understand, please just wave and I'll try to make sure that I rephrase. So the topic of my talk today is antitrust compliance in a globalized world. And as Carolina said, I'm Global Legal Director of Antitrust at AB InBev. And you may know us as the brewer who brings you brands like Club, Budweiser, Corona, and Stella. We have operations in over 50 markets, and we employ more than 200,000 people. And last year, our global turnover exceeded $56 billion US. So as you can imagine, that's a whole lot of antitrust laws that we need to comply with. It's a whole lot of employees that need to be compliant, and it's a whole lot of turnover that could be used to impose antitrust fines on us. So I want to spend the next 20 minutes with you sharing a little bit how we as a global company tackle exactly that. So how do we get that many people to comply with antitrust laws? And I'm very grateful for this opportunity to be addressing you here today. And I think it's great that the superintendencia and the university work together to bring a vast array of people and expertise in this one room, because I strongly believe that hearing different perspectives from different countries and from different actors within the broader antitrust community will help us all to become better antitrust professionals. So let me start with the first principle that we apply when we set our antitrust compliance strategy globally. It is we set clear and consistent rules throughout the company. Because obviously, key to any antitrust compliance strategy is that your employees know the rules that they need to comply with. So that means a lot of training. So all of our employees are trained in the basics of antitrust law once a year. And then our employees that are most relevant for antitrust, our commercial teams, they get in-person training also at least once a year. And I personally train our senior commercial leadership actually at various points during the year. But training is only the start, right? In addition to training people, it's important that the whole culture of the company is set from the top. So we ask our senior executives to always reinforce the importance of antitrust when they address their employees, when they have town hall meetings. We have a message from our CEO who endorses our code of good business conduct. And it's really important because for a junior employee going out in the market negotiating contracts, if they don't feel they are supported by the senior leadership, you're nothing but even training them, right? They need to understand that everyone is following the same rules. So I would say that's easier said than done, training people in antitrust rules. And it's very easy to put a principle. We set clear and consistent rules. But I'm sure that, as most of you in this room know, in antitrust, there are no clear rules, right? And that's immediately the biggest challenge that I face as an antitrust professional in-house. How do you communicate clear, bright-line rules to employees in an area of law that is notorious for all its different shades of gray? And we wouldn't have conferences like these if all the answers were already out there, right? If everything was just yes or no. So it's a really big challenge because you need to train your people in the different shades of gray. And in addition to that challenge, there's another challenge, which is that when you talk to a commercial leader in one of our countries, they need to comply with a whole host of rules. And antitrust is only one set of rules they need to comply with. They also need to comply with safety rules, with anti-bribery rules. In short, a whole lot of different things, right? And I sometimes get the question from employees. They say, we understand if we bribe a public official, our country becomes more corrupt. If we don't adhere to our quality standards, our consumers may get sick. If I don't adhere to the safety rule in a brewery, people may die. But who dies when I recommend or when I enforce our recommended resale price in a bar? I'm very happy that no one dies because of antitrust infringements, so don't get me wrong. But I think it lays bare a fundamental issue that I think we as antitrust professionals all grapple with. And it goes back to what the first panel discussed this morning. What is antitrust law? Why is it important? How do I communicate effectively to employees that, adhering to the rules on discounts is as important as adhering to the rules of anti-fraud? How do you do that? So it's not even, it's even made worse, I would say, by the fact that you have different markets, different antitrust laws, different sets of enforcers, and they don't always apply the rules in the same way, right? So even if I get one employee to understand that antitrust law is very important for this or that reason, or because there's this or that policy that's underlying that rule, if that person travels to another country, and in our company that happens a lot, that executives move to other countries, and then suddenly they see that actually in that market, that rule is not that important at all, it kind of undermines, again, the rationale for antitrust rules. So I am very happy actually to see that within the international antitrust scene, there's more and more convergence and there's more and more forums where also antitrust enforcers come together to discuss how they can apply the rules consistently. You have the ICN, you have the OECD, you have tons of international antitrust conferences, you have regional conferences like this one here, and I, for one, really encourage this interaction between different authorities because it makes it easier for global companies to see the red line through all the different antitrust rules. And there's a second point that I always want to mention. It's an invitation to authorities to be very clear on what they think the rule is. And so I very much welcome this initiative by this university to make sure that at least the decisions of the authority are published and are accessible to everyone, because obviously setting clear rules starts also with having transparency when it comes to decisions that were based on those rules. So transparency is very important. And I know there are challenges because companies always claim confidentiality over parts of decisions. But I do think with the technology of today, we can overcome those challenges. So there's that. And the fact that more and more, I'm totally getting distracted because of the pictures. Let me just say, I'm very happy to see that authorities are becoming more and more transparent, publishing their rules, and also publishing more and more guidance on the rules. Because obviously it's difficult to take new laws or to adapt new laws or to convince Parliament to change laws that may not be working effectively. But one thing authorities can do is publish soft laws, so publish guidelines as to why they think rules have to be in this or that way, or how companies can comply better. So I think there are ways to address these challenges so that we can really work towards setting clear and consistent rules also internally in companies. So the second principle that we apply is that we try to go for compliance by design. So what does that mean? We don't expect our employees to be antitrust experts, right? And as I just said, antitrust is a particular area of gray. So wherever we can, we try to take the decision away from the employee. I know it sounds a little bit fascist, but that's not at all what I mean. So I'll just give you a very concrete example. So our commercial teams are currently working on building a consistent database for commercial contracts they are negotiating. For them, that's one too far. For them, it's really important to be able to track consistently what the performance is of commercial contracts. So to be very concrete. If you have a contract with a retailer and there are certain discounts that are being negotiated if they hit a certain volume, or if they get additional discounts if they participate in certain promotions, it's important to be able to track, okay, what was negotiated at the beginning of the year and how does their actual performance filter into that. So they are building this big database. In order for this database to work, it's important that we have clear contract templates and that those templates can be downloaded from the platform and then uploaded again. The legal teams in the markets where we are piloting this have reviewed all of those contracts to make sure that there's no unlawful or anti-competitive clauses in those contracts. So in markets where we have a large market share, we can't have too many exclusivities. So the whole tool is now built towards preventing people from downloading contracts, adding clauses that they shouldn't be adding, and then uploading those again because the tool just wouldn't let them. So an employee doesn't really need to think about those contracts anymore. They know for a fact, if I download this contract, I can execute it and it is compliant with antitrust laws. So that's what I mean by compliance with design. And that brings me to our third core principle, which is that we try to prevent anti-competitive behavior from happening. That's what we're in the business for. And that's actually a mission that we share with antitrust authorities all around the world. Now, of course, we're also there in case something goes really bad. But my mission is to make sure that in the end, we will become redundant. Right? So we try to prevent. And so how do we do that? To prevent means that you need to understand fully what is going on in your company. So we need to have full visibility into what the commercial strategies are. And there's one organizational measure that you can take as a big international company, which is making sure that your legal and compliance teams have a seat at the table. So I would say in all of our mancoms, there's a legal person present, and they have the same vote as the commercial teams. We have compliance committees set up, and they bring together the different stakeholders in the company, be it sales, be it people, be it compliance, legal, and they discuss the big matters that couldn't be resolved between the legal team and the commercial team. So there's this dedicated body that looks at our compliance risk more widely. And so by having these organizational controls already, you already know before something will happen what the plans are, and you can make sure that antitrust compliance features into that. Now, obviously, that doesn't always work because not everything gets escalated to the level of the ManCom. Not everything gets escalated to the two-zone compliance committee. So what do we do in addition? And this was actually one of the biggest things that I did last year when I came on board. We had just combined with SAB Miller. So suddenly we were active in a whole host of markets where we weren't active before, and we were much bigger. So our antitrust risk was much bigger. So we launched a project everywhere in the world where we had a deep look at our commercial practices, all of our commercial practices. So our local legal and compliance teams went out, interviewed with salespeople at different levels of the organization, reviewed their documents, reviewed the strategic plans, and then identified on a consistent basis what all of the potential risks were with what they had observed. And then we drafted remediation plans. So for every risk that we identified, we put a remediation action against it. And to give you a sense of the magnitude of that effort, last year, we completed 457 remediation actions around the world, and that was purely on antitrust. So that was a huge effort, and we are repeating that this year because we want to make it a continuous cycle. So by having done that, we have prevented risk, and I'm very proud actually of the teams, including the team of Caro, Jaime, for having worked so hard last year and again this year for making sure that we see the risks as they arise and that we address them appropriately before anything goes bad. So, as you can imagine, that's a whole lot of work. It's a whole lot of people and a whole lot of money that goes into that. And since the theme of today's conference is technology or how do you leverage big data, we also even though we're not a technology company, we on the compliance side at AB InBev, we leverage technology in the compliance space. So what does that mean? We try to build systems and tools to help us be more compliant. One of those tools is what we call the compliance channel. It's much broader than just antitrust, but I'll just tell you how it is relevant for antitrust. It's an app and a website that our employees can access from anywhere. And in that, they can log requests for approval. So they don't need to put in too much explanation. There's a simple form that they can fill out. They can even just add pictures if that's easier. And they can simply ask us, okay, is this okay? Can we do this? Yes or no? Now, you can ask, well, why don't they just go to legal next door? They can. They can still walk into our office and ask us a question. But the beauty of the compliance channel is that it is starting to give us big data insight. Which market asks the most questions? What type of questions do we get? And all of that filters back into our training programs, because if there's a market where we see a consistent pattern of questions around exclusivities, then we know that that's an area where people feel like they don't have the necessary guidance. And so that is a very simple way, I would say, where we leverage technology. A much more ambitious project that we have launched this year is we are trying to leverage all of the commercial data that is sitting within the company to see whether, if we look at certain patterns, if we look at certain volume data, certain discount data, certain turnover or revenue data of key accounts, can we see whether there's a bizarre pattern that could be indicative of antitrust risk? So we are actually now in the process of defining algorithms that would be able to tell us, is this risky from an antitrust point of view or not? And we are building risk dashboards that will, I would hope, in the midterm, replace this manual exercise of speaking to people, looking at people's emails, but that will give us a real-time view of our antitrust risk based on what are the market conditions in which we operate versus what is the commercial team actually doing. Another important thing is that we hold people accountable. And some of you who are advising in-house teams, or if you are in the in-house community yourself, surely you will recognize this pattern of commercial teams taking huge legal risks, getting their bonuses because they meet all of their targets. And then when it all goes bad, they have moved on, and it's the legal team's problem to either defend what they did in front of a court or before an authority. And so you get into this thing where it's the commercial teams who take the risk, and it's the legal teams who ultimately then end up having to solve it. And that's particularly pressing in antitrust, I would say. Because in antitrust, you have this thing where commercial incentives to perform are almost diametrically opposed to incentives to comply. So what I mean by that is that if you have a market where you're the market leader, right? Your sales force is still going out in a market and is still in the business to grow volume, even though you may already be the market leader, but they still have volume targets to meet. So if they conclude an exclusivity agreement that may or may not be anti-competitive, if they conclude an exclusivity agreement, they may go against our compliance strategy, but they will say, but this helps the company because I just grew the volume of the company. So to make sure that we don't get into this friction between the two incentives, we built into the performance targets of our commercial teams a conditionality. So as of this year, our commercial teams will only meet their performance targets if they have done it in a compliant way. And so we use all of our compliance tools to confirm at the end of the year that they didn't do anything anti-competitive. And that has led to an increase in questions coming from the commercial teams because they are now a bit more cautious, because now they know if I do something anti-competitive, it's going to be my problem too. It's going to hit my wallet. And it's no longer just the legal and compliance team. And this may seem like a small thing, but it's a huge thing in a company where more than 40% of people's salaries is tied to their bonus. So I hope that with this short overview of the different tools that we deploy in our legal and compliance strategy, that you can see that we even though we're a very big company, we are not necessarily bad, to take the terminology of the previous panel. But we take our responsibility as a leader very seriously, because we don't just want to be a leading brewer, we also want to be a leader when it comes to compliance and set the right example in all of the markets that we operate. And that means that, as you hopefully take away from my talk, we try to look every day for innovative and better ways to tell our people how to do business in the right way, day after day. I'm very happy to take questions if you have some, and otherwise, thank you very much for listening to me. I'll still be around for the rest of the day if you want to speak to me. Thank you.